I flew to Oakland without telling anyone in advance, and the moment I arrived, I discovered a truth that nearly stopped my heart. My daughter-in-law, Zuri, was dying, lying alone in the ICU at Highland Hospital without a single family member by her side. Meanwhile, Malik, my son, was driving the car I had just bought for him, carrying several unfamiliar girls blasting music, partying wildly through the streets as if life held nothing worth worrying about. I didn't scream. I didn't call him to confront him or beg him to come back. I simply took out my phone in silence, dialed 911, and reported that the car registered in my name had been stolen. 2 days later, when the police released him, Malik crawled back to me, knelt at my feet, and begged for my forgiveness. But by then, it was already too late. Because before he could even open his mouth to speak, I had already signed the paperwork, transferring full ownership of the apartment into the name of Zuri, my daughter-in-law. Hello, everyone. Before I open my heart and tell this painful story, I want to ask you for one very small favor. Please subscribe to the channel and press the like button so stories like this can be shared and reach more people. And if you can, leave me a comment telling me which city and which state you're listening from. Just knowing how far my voice has traveled is enough to warm my heart a little. Now then, please sit back comfortably, take a deep breath. Because in the next part, I will tell you why a mother like me was forced to make such a ruthless decision and what truly happened inside that apartment before Zuri was rushed into the emergency room. Oakland Airport greeted me with the familiar sounds of haste, the rolling of suitcases across stone floors, hurried voices calling out to one another, and the rich aroma of roasted coffee drifting from the Pete's Coffee near the exit gates. Everything felt utterly ordinary, but inside me, there was not a trace of the joy that usually accompanies a family reunion. I didn't feel the warmth that so often wraps around mothers flying to visit their children. Instead, somewhere deep beneath my ribs, there was a block of ice, cold and spinning slowly, tightening around every breath I took. That feeling forced me, a woman accustomed to discipline, someone who planned everything months in advance, to drop everything, buy the earliest flight available, and cross half the country without telling anyone a word. On my shoulder was my familiar canvas tote bag. Inside were 2 jars of homemade mulberry jam, sour, dark, the kind that helps with colds, the kind Malik had loved obsessively when he was a child in Chicago. Beside them was a soft stuffed teddy bear. Ridiculous, right? Zuri wasn't even pregnant, at least not that I knew of. But in our last conversation, her voice had been so thin it felt as if it might shatter, so fragile that one more gust of wind could make it disappear entirely. I just wanted to bring her something warm, something that carried the breath of childhood, something that said, "You are not alone." 3 days. For 3 full days, I called Malik. The phone rang again and again, but not once was it answered. Zuri had disappeared from the radar a full week earlier. A mother is never wrong about her instincts, the elders always say. I used to think that was just poetic nonsense, until I felt that icy fear myself, slowly seeping into every fiber of my body. There are fears that don't scream. They simply sit quietly in your chest and wait for the moment you realize you were right. The Uber ride to their neighborhood took about 40 minutes. Through the window, the building appeared solid and imposing, a pre-war brick structure with high ceilings and a spacious courtyard located right in the heart of uptown Oakland. I was the one who had bought this condo for them 3 years earlier, right after the wedding. I wanted the young couple to have a beginning I never had, not counting every penny until payday, not living in damp, cramped apartments where winter seeped into your bones. I believed that a foundation built of brick and money could guarantee happiness. Dear God, how wrong I was. When I stepped off the elevator on the 3rd floor, I froze in front of the door. It was ajar, not wide open, but open enough, as if someone had rushed out and forgotten to pull it closed until it clicked shut. I pushed the heavy door with my shoulder and stepped inside. A stagnant, suffocating smell hit me square in the face. Not the smell of a home, not the scent of peach pie Zuri used to bake every weekend. It was the stale odor of old cigarettes mixed with something sharply sour, like wine left too long, turned into vinegar. Malik had sworn to me he quit smoking a year ago. "Mom, smoking's bad for your health, and it's not even trendy anymore," he had said, flashing that charming smile, the same smile that had coaxed countless things out of me over the years. Shoes were scattered across the hallway. One stood upright. The other had been kicked into the coat rack, leaving a long scrape along the cream-colored wallpaper. I stepped into the kitchen, trying to keep my footsteps light, though I didn't even know who I was afraid of waking. On the table sat a mountain of unwashed dishes, hardened pizza crusts, and empty bottles of expensive cognac. Right at the edge of the table was a stack of unpaid utility bills, pink and white envelopes still sealed, untouched. But that wasn't the worst part. Beside the bills was a small box of medication, heart medicine and blood pressure pills the doctor had prescribed for Zuri 6 months earlier. The box was still sealed. A thin layer of dust covered it. That dust said more than any scream ever could. No one had touched it for a very long time. "Who are you looking for?" A hoarse voice behind me made me spin around. An elderly neighbor stood in the doorway, wearing a faded house robe, looking at me with a mix of curiosity and pity. "I'm Malik's mother," I said. My voice sounded steady, but inside, everything was collapsing. "Where is Malik? And where is Zuri?" She pressed her lips together and shook her head. "Oh dear, I don't know where your Malik is. Probably out running wild somewhere. The music here was blaring until dawn 3 days ago." She paused. "But your girl, Zuri, she was taken away by an ambulance." "When?" I asked, barely able to breathe. 2 or 3 days ago. They carried her out on a stretcher, unconscious, thin like a ghost." She glanced around the abandoned apartment. "No one's come back since. I was about to call the police myself." The world tilted. I don't remember how I left the building. I don't remember calling a taxi. There was only one name pounding relentlessly in my head, like a hammer striking stone: Highland Hospital, the nearest trauma center, where they take all emergency cases. The emergency waiting room smelled of bleach and trouble. Medical staff in uniform swept past me like blurred white streaks, hurried and indifferent. I, normally calm and polite, no longer had the patience to wait. I walked straight up to the admissions desk and demanded to see the intake list. The last name Jefferson, the name Zuri took after marriage, appeared in the ICU registry. The intensive care unit greeted me with a heavy silence, broken only by the steady beep, beep of machines. They didn't want to let me in, but my presence, the gaze of a mother ready to tear down walls, forced the nurse to turn and call for a doctor. Dr. Du Bois stepped out. A tall man, his eyes weary, as if he had seen too many things no one should have to see. He removed his glasses, wiped them quickly on his lab coat, and looked straight at me. "Are you the mother?" he asked, his voice dry. "My daughter-in-law's mother," I replied. "Where is she? What happened?" "Pneumonia," he said clearly. "Both lungs, severe stage, but that's only half the problem." He paused, giving me time to brace myself. "Her body is completely exhausted, severe dehydration and malnutrition. It looks like she hasn't eaten a proper meal in at least 2 weeks and has been running a 40-degree fever for at least 5 days, without any assistance." Each word dropped into my mind like a stone falling into a deep well. If the neighbor hadn't called 911 after hearing her collapse, the doctor concluded, we wouldn't be having this conversation. No food, no water, alone. Where was my son? Where was her husband, the man who stood at the altar and vowed to stand by her in sickness and in health? "May I see her?" I asked quietly. "1 minute," he said. "She's in a medically induced coma, on a ventilator." I stepped into the room. Zuri lay on the high hospital bed, her body tangled in tubes and wires. Her face was smaller than the pillow beneath her head. Her cheekbones were so sharp they looked ready to pierce through her fragile skin. Zuri had always been petite, but now She looked almost transparent. This was no longer illness. This was a slow murder by neglect. I couldn't breathe. The air thickened, crushing my chest. I knew that if I stayed one more second, I would scream right there. I nodded to the doctor, unable to feel my legs, and rushed out the exit. There are moments in life when the truth doesn't arrive with an explosion. It arrives quietly, and the moment you understand it, you know there is no turning back. I stood on the hospital steps. Dusk was settling over the city. Cars passed by. People hurried along with their lives, unaware that behind these walls, a young woman was fighting for every breath. And then, I saw him. Tires screeched sharply. A massive SUV shot around the corner. The metallic navy paint shimmered under the streetlights, glaring straight into my eyes. That car, luxurious, powerful, advertised as the safest in its class, was the very one I had given Malik exactly 1 month earlier for his birthday. "For the family, Mom. For driving the kids someday," he had said. The window rolled down. Deafening club music blasted out, rattling the hospital windows. My son sat behind the wheel. He was laughing loudly, head thrown back, shouting something to his passengers. 2 young women sat beside him, cheering, leaning out the windows, waving at passers-by. Malik didn't look toward the hospital. He didn't even glance at the windows where his wife was battling death. In that moment, he was the king of the world, the master of an expensive toy I had bought for him. The SUV roared past, blasting me with the hot stench of burnt rubber, then vanished toward downtown, where nightclub lights burned bright. I stood frozen. The anger hadn't arrived yet. Only a cold numbness spread through me. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out. A message from Malik, the first in 3 days. "Mom, I can't talk. I'm at the hospital with Zuri right now. It's serious. The doctors are fighting. I'm not leaving her side. Please pray for us." I stared at the screen. The letters blurred, not because of tears. The tears had evaporated, burned away by a cold flame rising from the depths of my chest. "Pray for us," he wrote. The man who had just sped past his dying wife with loud music and strange women was asking me to pray. In that moment, something inside me snapped with a dry, cracking sound, not a broken heart, but the thread of patience, the thread that had held a mother's blind love together for years. I realized that standing before me was no longer a lost, misguided child. Standing before me was a monster, calculating, cold, and utterly convinced of its own immunity. I didn't scream. I didn't call back to unleash my rage or listen to pathetic excuses. Screaming is the weapon of the weak. Screaming is an admission of pain, and I felt no pain. Felt? I felt clarity, a cold, razor-sharp clarity like crystal, something I had never even felt during the hardest years running a logistics company in Chicago, when I had to fire thieves or face down protection rackets in the 1990s. I slowly turned and walked back into the hospital. The lobby was nearly empty, filled only with the hum of a coffee machine. I approached the reception desk. A young woman was bent over writing. "Excuse me," I said. "May I have some water?" My voice was so calm it frightened even me. She handed me a plastic cup. I sat down on a hard chair in the corner of the waiting room. I needed 10 minutes. 10 minutes to bury my son, the child with scraped knees, with the first clumsy drawing he gave me on Mother's Day, with the promise that he would be my support, that Malik no longer existed. All that remained was a stranger wearing my eyes, believing the world revolved around him. I took a sip of water. It was warm and tasted like plastic. The pieces began to fall into place in my mind. The car, the navy blue Cadillac Escalade. I was the buyer. I chose the interior. I paid the insurance, and thank God, I had registered it under my name. Malik had complained when he found out. "Don't you trust me, Mom?" I had laughed it off, saying insurance was cheaper for older drivers. Now, that joke became my trump card. He thought the car was an extension of his ego. But on paper, it was my property. That meant Malik was driving it only with my silent consent. That consent, ended the moment I saw his smile through the car window. I took out my phone. Not a single muscle in my face twitched. I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked, sounding tired. Good evening, I said clearly, letting each word fall like a judge's gavel. I would like to report a stolen vehicle. Please provide your name and the vehicle information. I read my name, the make, the license plate. When and where did the theft occur? I just saw my vehicle, a navy blue Escalade driving on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, heading toward the entertainment district. An unauthorized male is behind the wheel. Do you know the person who took it? I closed my eyes for a second. The image of Zuri, motionless among the tubes, filled my mind. No, I said. Or perhaps I was telling the truth, because in that moment, he was no longer my son. I suspect the driver is under the influence of alcohol. He's driving aggressively and endangering lives. There are passengers in the vehicle. Their safety may be at risk. I request immediate action. Understood. Units have been dispatched. Please remain available. I ended the call. My hand holding the phone was completely steady. No shaking, no doubt. I had just handed my own flesh and blood over to the law, and I felt not a single trace of regret. But even that still wasn't enough. The car was just metal, an expensive toy. What I needed to protect was something more important. I opened my contacts and found Theodora's number. An old friend of mine, the sharpest attorney in the city, a old-school woman, the kind who doesn't ask unnecessary questions when she hears steel in someone's voice. It was late, yet Theodora picked up right after the second ring. Yvonne, you're in Oakland? Why didn't you call me? Hello, Theodora. Listen carefully. I need you to draft some documents for me right now, tonight. What documents, Yvonne? What happened? You sound like you're sitting in a board meeting. Worse, Theodora, much worse. I spoke slowly, each word landing with clarity. I need a deed of gift for the condo, the one Malik and Zuri are living in. Understood, she replied immediately, almost reflexively. Transfer it to Malik, so you finally decided to give him the title. No, I cut in. Not to Malik, to Zuri. Silence on the other end. A silence with weight, as if the whole room had stopped breathing. Theodora had known me for 30 years. She understood how much I adored Malik. A sharp turn like this could only be the sign of a disaster. To Zuri, she repeated, slow and firm. Yvonne, are you sure? That's a serious move. That property is worth a fortune. I have never been more certain, I said, and prepare a full power of attorney in my name to handle all matters related to that property. I want the paperwork ready to sign tomorrow morning. I will pay you double for the rush. I'll have it done. Her voice shifted completely into work mode. Come to my office at 8 tomorrow morning. We said goodbye. I remained seated in the hospital lobby, eyes fixed on the closed ICU doors, as if staring long enough could protect Zuri with my gaze. 20 minutes passed. Time stretched thick as tar. In my mind, a scene played like a film. A patrol car with flashing lights pinning the Navy SUV against the curb, the pounding music dying down, and the smile on Malik's face, sliding off his skin like a mask dropping to the ground. Do you know what hurts most in a flip of the script? It's not when you strike. It's when you realize you've had enough reason to strike for a long time. You just only dared to do it today. My phone rang, a sharp ring, like a blade slicing through the hospital silence. A strange local number appeared on the screen. I answered, my voice terrifyingly calm. Yvonne Hargrove speaking. A serious official male voice came through. This is Officer Bradshaw. We have detained a vehicle matching your description on Peachtree Street. Behind the wheel is a citizen named Malik Hargrove. He is acting aggressively and resisting arrest. In the background I heard noise, scuffling, and my son's distorted shout. You don't have the right. Call her. That's my mother. She'll explain everything. Mrs. Hargrove, Officer Bradshaw continued, raising his voice over the commotion. The suspect claims he is your son and that you gave him the vehicle. Is that true? If you confirm, we will have to release him with only a DUI citation." I took a deep breath, the sterile hospital air. In my mind, I saw Zuri lying behind that wall, alone in the darkness of a coma, while Malik could still party as if she didn't exist. "Officer," I said, without a single note of hesitation, "my son, Malik, is currently in the ICU at Highland Hospital. He is sitting beside his dying wife's bed holding her hand. He is praying for his wife's health, and he has not left her side." I paused, letting every word fall clearly. "The man you have detained is a liar. I don't know who he is, and I don't know why he is hiding behind my name." A second of silence hung on the line. I could hear Officer Bradshaw processing it. Then he said, his voice firm again, "I understand, Mrs. Hargrove. We will proceed to the full extent of the law: auto theft, resisting arrest, fraud." "Thank you," I replied. "Thank you, Officer Bradshaw. Do your job." I pressed end. The screen went dark. I saw my reflection in the dark window glass. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, but strangely, I liked her. She was ready for war. The next 48 hours blurred, melting into a single, long, gray day. I practically moved into the hospital, speaking with the medical director, arranging for Zuri to have a private room, hiring a nurse to care for her around the clock. Money, as always, opened doors that stayed shut for ordinary people. I sat beside Zuri's bed, held her limp hand, and talked a lot. I talked about the weather, about how beautiful the autumn leaves up north were, about the sweet potato pies we would bake together when she got better. I filled the silence with words, as if leaving no empty space would keep death from daring to enter. Meanwhile, Malik was sitting in a jail cell. I knew it because my phone kept lighting up, calls from unfamiliar numbers, coming from the jail. He was using the rare calls he was allowed, but he wasn't calling a lawyer. He was calling me. I didn't answer. I imagined him there, angry, not afraid. Maybe he was pacing his cell like a caged tiger, telling other inmates what a ridiculous mistake this was. "My mom's about to come down here," I heard his imagined voice. "She'll tear this place apart." In his mind, this was just a system glitch, a bureaucratic nightmare that I, the all-powerful mother, would arrive to fix and pull him out of. Once he left a voicemail. I listened to it in the hospital hallway, pressing the phone tight to my ear. "Mom, where are you? Why aren't you answering?" His voice cracked into a hiss. "Something crazy is happening. The cops say you reported the car stolen. Are you out of your mind? Bring the registration and the keys right now and tell them you made a mistake. I'm sitting here with beggars. It smells disgusting, Mom." Not a single word about Zuri, not one question about how she was doing. Only me, mine, my. In his head, Zuri was still silent, like a loyal dog, lying somewhere in the apartment, waiting for him to come home, too afraid to open her mouth to her mother-in-law. He didn't know that his silent victim was balancing on the edge between life and death. And that silence spoke louder than any accusation. There are truths that don't need to scream. They only need to be written down, to be enough to condemn a person. In the rare gaps between care shifts, I went back to the apartment. I needed Zuri's identification documents to complete the paperwork for her private room. The apartment greeted me with the same stagnant smell and betrayal, just like before. I began going through the belongings methodically, without hesitation now. In the bedroom dresser drawer, beneath a neatly folded stack of linens, I found an old diary, its cover worn. It wasn't just a notebook. It was a chronicle of survival. I opened to a random page. Zuri's handwriting, normally rounded and tidy, here was small, slanted, jagged, as if every line had been written in fear. 12:30. Malik asked for money again, said he needed it to keep face in front of business partners. I gave him the last $400 I had saved for the dentist. My tooth hurts unbearably, but he said if he didn't have a new shirt, the deal would collapse and we'd end up on the street. I had to accept it. I turned the page. 20/4. He yelled. said the condo was actually his, that his mother gave it to him and they were only letting me stay here, said if I complained about him not working, he would throw me out. I'm scared. I have nowhere to go. Mom is gone. Dad is far away. I have to endure it for the sake of family. My vision went dark. He had lied to her. He used my kindness like a club, beating her into submission. He convinced Zuri that she was nobody, just an empty space in his kingdom. He didn't just steal her money, he was stealing her dignity, day by day, drop by drop. I flipped to the next page. 5 out of 5. He sold my gold ring, the one from my grandmother, said he lost it, but I saw the pawn receipt in his pocket. With that money, he bought himself a watch. He said, "You just stay at home. You don't need jewelry. But I need to look the part." I closed the diary. My hands were shaking. But now it wasn't from fear. It was from a rage so concentrated it could burn paper. This was no longer selfishness. This was financial and psychological terror. He was destroying Zuri systematically, so he could elevate himself. I took the diary with me, not as evidence for a courtroom, but as evidence for my conscience, so when he stood before me with the eyes of a beaten dog, I would not waver. Back at the hospital, I sat down in the same old spot. The steady beep, beep of the heart monitor became the only music. I held Zuri's hand. It was dry and hot. "You're not alone, my girl," I whispered. "Do you hear me? You're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I know everything now. He won't hurt you again. I promise." A few more hours passed. Outside the window, the sky gradually faded into a pale gray. Morning of the third day was drawing near. I dozed off on the hard chair beside the hospital bed, my head drooping to my chest. Then suddenly, I felt the faintest movement, like a butterfly brushing against my palm. I snapped my eyes open. Zuri's fingers, resting in my hand, twitched lightly. I froze, afraid to breathe too hard, terrified that even the smallest motion might make that fragile moment disappear. Her eyelids fluttered, slowly lifting like a heavy curtain being drawn away from a lamp. Her gaze was still cloudy, without an anchor. She looked through me, through the ceiling, as if drifting somewhere in a void. Then her eyes grew clearer, and she saw me. There was no recognition, only fear, primitive fear, deep and naked, so raw it hurt to witness. Her lips moved weakly beneath the breathing mask. I leaned close to hear. "Don't let him in." Her voice rasped, dry and small, like crumbling dead leaves. "Don't let him in." "Who, sweetheart?" I asked softly, though my heart already knew the answer. "Who mustn't come in?" Zuri squeezed my hand, so hard it startled me. In her eyes, terror flared unmistakably. "Malik," she breathed out, and a single tear slid silently down her temple. "He turned off the heater, said it costs money. I was cold. Don't let him in." The monitors around the bed immediately began beeping faster. Her heart rate spiked. A nurse rushed in, syringe already in hand. "Shh, shh. Zuri, calm down." I gently stroked her hair, feeling a wave of cold, razor-sharp determination rise inside my chest. "No one will touch you. Go back to sleep." There are confessions that are never spoken in court. They are only whispered. In the moment someone thinks they are about to die. He turned off the heater in the middle of winter, in the very apartment where his wife lay burning with fever, just to save a few dollars that were later thrown into gas for a luxury SUV and cocktails for unfamiliar women. He didn't hit her. He didn't scream at her. He froze her, slowly. I left the room, letting the doctors continue working with Zuri. The door closed behind me with a dry click. My face had become a mask of stone now. I was no longer a mother. I was a judge. And the sentence had been delivered. At last. No appeal. 40 minutes later, the elevator doors slid open, and he stepped out. Malik looked pathetic. His designer dress shirt was wrinkled, smeared with a brown stain I couldn't even identify. His hair stuck up in uneven spikes, Dark circles bruised beneath his eyes. He was limping on his left leg, probably the result of a warm welcome from inmates or the police during his arrest. But even in that state, he still tried to cling to the last scraps of his pride. His eyes swept the corridor, not searching for a doctor, not searching for his wife, but searching for me. When he spotted me sitting in the chair, he marched straight over, his face twisted into what he called righteous outrage, though it looked more like the sulking fury of a spoiled child. "Finally," he snarled down the hallway, startling the nurse who had dozed off. "Do you even know what you did? They locked me up with beggars for 2 days." He leaned over me, looming, expecting the familiar scene, me springing up, panicked, apologizing, shoving money into his hand, patting his head like always. But I didn't move. I slowly closed my book, rested it on my knees, and looked up at him. My eyes were dry and still, like a desert. "Hello, Malik," I said softly. "You stink. Go take a shower, then come back and shout." He jerked back. For 1 second, his mouth hung open like a fish thrown onto shore. "Stink?" he hissed, lowering his voice only because a doctor had just passed by. "Are you insane? You had the cops arrest me. You told them I stole the car, my car. You humiliated me in front of my friends, in front of Candy. Do you know what she wrote to me?" "I do," I nodded. "She wrote the truth." I paused. "You are a failure, Malik." The word hit him harder than a slap. He staggered, red blotches blooming across his face. "How dare you!" He choked on his rage. "I'm going to see Zuri right now. She'll confirm I took the car with her permission. She'll tell them everything. You'll regret this. Where are the keys? Give me the keys. I have to go. I have things to do." "You don't have anything to do," I said, each word nailed into place. "And you don't have a car." He let out a shaky scoff. "So you hid it? Come on, Mom. I get the lesson. Give me the keys. I really need to go. I promise them." "The car has been sold," I cut in. 1 hour ago, the dealership picked it up from impound. The money has been transferred into the hospital's account. He went still. "Mom, you don't have the right," he panted. "That was my gift." "On paper," I said coldly. "It's my property. I dispose of it as I see fit. That money will be used to pull your wife back from the dead, out of the grave you shoved her into." For the first time, fear flashed in his eyes. Not fear for Zuri, but the fear of an animal cornered, stripped of its teeth and claws. "You're lying," he whispered. "You can't. You love me. I'm your son." "Yes," I nodded, and that truth was bitter as wormwood. "But I'm not funding you anymore. You're a 35-year-old man, Malik. You have no job, no car, and while we're at it—" I paused, letting the truth sink in. "You don't have a home." "What did you say?" He went pale. "The condo now belongs to Zuri, legally. I signed the deed of gift this morning. You're no longer the owner there. Your name isn't even on the lease." He swayed in place, as if the floor were sliding out from under him. All his arrogance, all his performance fell away like husks. What remained was a small man, frightened and greedy. "You're just trying to scare me," he muttered. "I'll see Zuri. She loves me. She'll undo it. She'll sign anything I tell her to." He spun around and lunged toward the ICU door. "Zuri!" he shouted, yanking the door wide open. "Zuri, tell her!" I didn't stand up. I knew what would happen. Malik only took 2 steps before a figure emerged from behind the curtain. Not a doctor, a private security guard, broad shoulders, a stone face. I had hired him 2 hours earlier, with one instruction: protect the patient from any male visitors, except medical staff. Without a wasted motion, the guard blocked Malik. A hand the size of a shovel pressed into Malik's chest. "Unauthorized entry," the guard growled low. "Don't touch me," Malik snapped, trying to slip past. "I'm the husband. I have rights. Zuri!" The heart monitor line on the screen jolted sharply. "You are disturbing a critically ill patient," the guard said, calm but firm, beginning to push Malik back. "Leave, or I will use force." "Mom!" Malik yelled, turning to me. "Tell him! She's my wife!" I gripped my book tighter. "Get him out," I said quietly. The guard heard. Malik was shoved back into the hallway. The ICU door slammed shut, cutting him off from the woman he had always treated like property. There are some people who only realize they've lost everything when the final door closes right in front of them. He stood in the empty corridor, unkempt, humiliated, stripped of all his toys. He looked at me. In his eyes was hatred, pure, undisguised, and in that moment I understood. The war had only just begun. But he didn't back down that easily. He would play the pity card. He would crawl. He would lie. And he started right then. Malik's face changed. The mask of rage slid off, replaced by a familiar look of suffering. He hesitated, then took one step toward me, slow, cautious. "Mom." His voice trembled, desperate, the way it used to when he was little and broke a vase. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm stupid. I lost my head. Help me. They'll kill me." I knew who he meant, the people he had promised money to from selling the apartment, but nothing inside me moved except a cold disgust. "Outside," I said, standing. "There are people here. We'll talk somewhere you're not disturbing the sick." I turned toward the exit, knowing he would follow. He had no other choice. I was his last hope, a hope I intended to crush completely. We walked into a long hospital hallway, far from the nurse's station and Zuri's room. It was empty, only flickering fluorescent lights, buzzing with an irritating hum. Malik trailed behind me like a beaten dog. I could feel his tension just inches at my back. He was still calculating, still hunting for an escape. I stopped by a window overlooking the parking lot, where his Navy SUV used to sit. Now there was only an empty space. I turned to face him. "Well?" I said. "I'm listening." Malik darted his eyes around to make sure there were no witnesses, then dropped to his knees. The scene was so dramatic, so staged, it made me nauseous. He grabbed the hem of my coat with filthy fingers and looked up at me with wet eyes. "Mom, please, forgive me," he wailed. Tears streamed down his cheeks, real or fake. By now I didn't even care. "I didn't mean it. I'll fix everything. I swear I'll never drive drunk again. I'll find a job. Just put everything back the way it was. Give me the apartment back." He sobbed, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "You don't understand," he said fast, choking. "I'm in huge trouble. Huge. I owe money. A lot. If I don't pay, they won't just beat me. They'll kill me. Mom, I'm your son. I'm your blood. Are you going to let them kill me?" He poured the words out, trying to crush me with pity, fear, and guilt. When he saw I remained silent, he scrambled for another angle. "And those girls in the car? They're just co-workers," he rushed on. "We were coming back from a company party. I was only driving them home. I love Zuri. I can't live without her. I was sitting there, praying. Mom, believe me." I looked down at him. Those shaking hands, that cringing posture. I didn't see a son. I saw a parasite that had drained us for years. "Stand up," I said. "I won't stand up until you forgive me," he shouted louder, intentionally making a scene so someone walking by would notice this performance of repentance. "Mom, I'll do anything. I'll take care of Zuri. I'll carry her in my arms. Just don't abandon me. Don't take my house. Stand up!" My voice snapped across him like a slap. He flinched, then slowly rose, still breathing hard. "You said you're my blood?" I asked, staring straight into his eyes. "Yes, that's true. And it's also my greatest shame. I raised you, I gave you everything, but I failed to teach you how to be human." I opened my bag and took out a folded sheet of paper, a copy of the deed of gift with the registration stamp. Theodora had sent it to me. "Look." I unfolded it in front of him. "Do you see this stamp? The condo is no longer yours, and it never will be. It belongs to Zuri completely." Malik stared at the document as if frozen. His eyes ran along each line, his pupils widening. But if she... He didn't finish. I understood. If Zuri died, in his mind as the legal husband, he would inherit everything. The condo, The money, the belongings. He had buried her alive in his thoughts and was calculating the profit. "Thinking about inheritance?" I asked. My voice was so cold it felt as if the hallway temperature had dropped 10 degrees. "Don't." I took out a second sheet of paper, my will, the one I had rewritten this morning at Theodora's office while waiting for the condo paperwork. "Read it," I said, pointing to the highlighted section. Malik read aloud, stumbling. "All of my assets, movable property, real estate, cash, and accounts. I leave to the Animal Rescue Hope for Paws." He snapped his head up at me, genuinely horrified. "Mom, you're joking, right? Cats? Are you crazy? You're giving everything to cats and leaving your own son on the street?" "Yes," I answered calmly. "At least cats are grateful when you feed them, and they don't turn off the heater when someone sick is lying there." There are people who only fear justice when it no longer comes from a courtroom, but from the person who once loved them most. 6 months passed. Autumn took over, painting the city in gold and deep red. But this cold was different, clean, refreshing, promising not death, but rest before a new rebirth. I sat on the balcony of that condo. Now it no longer smelled damp and smoky, but of freshly brewed tea with rosemary and oil paint. Zuri sat across from me, wrapped in a soft, toasted milk-colored blanket. She was still thin, and sometimes the way she moved still showed the caution of a survivor after a long illness. But the hunted emptiness was no longer in her eyes. Life shone there. She was painting. A watercolor landscape was blooming on the easel, the view from the window of the old park. "You know, Mom," she said, dipping her brush into the cup of water. She started calling me Mom a month ago, and every time, that word warmed my heart. "I found a job at the Central Library. They opened a rare books room, and they need a restorer. The pay isn't much, but it's enough for me, and the schedule is quiet." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I smiled, sipping my tea. "But don't worry about money. You know we have plenty." "I know." She set the brush down and looked at me seriously. "But I want to do it myself. I want to feel like I can. After everything, it matters to me to know I'm not helpless." "You're the strongest girl I know," I said, placing my hand over hers. But the road to get here was not easy. The first month after Zuri was discharged was hell for both of us. She couldn't walk on her own. Her muscles had wasted too much. I had to hire a physical therapist to come 3 times a week. I remember the first session. She tried to stand up from the bed and her legs buckled. She collapsed onto the floor, hugged her knees, and cried. "I'll never be normal again," she whispered. "You will," I knelt beside her. "But not today. Today you only have to try again." It took 3 weeks before she could walk from the bedroom to the living room without stopping halfway. The nightmares came too. Every night, exactly at 2 in the morning, I heard Zuri scream. I would rush into her room and find her sitting bolt upright in bed, soaked in sweat. "He's here," she gasped. "Mom, I hear his key at the door." "There's no one, sweetheart. Mom changed the locks. He doesn't have a key anymore." But every night, the same nightmare. I had to hire a psychologist, Dr. Chen, a Chinese-American woman specializing in trauma from domestic abuse. "Zuri has PTSD," Dr. Chen told me after the first session. "Her body is recovering, but her mind is still trapped in that cage. Treatment will take time, possibly years." "We have time," I replied. In the second month, Zuri began having small firsts. The first time she walked down to the corner grocery store by herself, she came back with her eyes shining. "Mom, I bought milk all by myself, without asking anyone, without explaining to anyone. I just bought it." I hugged her, feeling her ribs still uneven, but no longer sharp like razors. The first time she cut her hair, a youthful short bob, she turned in front of the mirror, touching her new hair. "He never let me cut it," she said softly. "He said long hair looked more ready to serve a husband." "Now you're free," I smiled. "You can shave your head if you want." She laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard in 6 months. The first time she wore a lemon-yellow dress, bright and vivid. Malik had forced her to wear only dark colors. "You wear bright colors, you're attracting other men," he used to say. "What do you want, huh? You want to be a whore?" Now she stood in that yellow dress, twirled in front of the mirror, and laughed like a child. But the most important first happened in the 3rd month. Zuri picked up the phone, the new phone I bought for her, and called her best friend from college, Jasmine. Malik had isolated her from all her friends. He deleted their numbers, blocked them on social media, and whenever someone called, he would snatch the phone and yell, "Zuri is busy. Don't call again." Gradually, they stopped calling. They thought Zuri had abandoned them. They didn't know she was being held captive. When Jasmine answered, I heard crying on both ends of the call. "Zuri! Zuri, is that you? Where are you? Do you know how worried we've been? We thought you—" "Jazz," Zuri whispered. I'm sorry I disappeared. I wasn't allowed to call, but I'm free now." They talked for 3 hours. When Zuri hung up, her face was soaked with tears, but she was smiling. "Mom, Jasmine said our friend group is going to throw a welcome-back party for me. They didn't forget me." "Of course they didn't forget you, sweetheart. Real friendship doesn't fade." We didn't talk about Malik. His name became forbidden, as if speaking it out loud might summon a demon back into our world. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I saw Zuri glance toward the door, her body stiffening. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I still sometimes expect him to burst in, with a key, yelling in my face that all of this belongs to him. He doesn't have a key, and if he dares step inside, the police will be here in 5 minutes. I installed an alarm system, an expensive one with cameras, door sensors, and an emergency button connected directly to the police station. Zuri carried a small alarm whistle in her bag. Dr. Chen said having a safety object would help her regain a sense of control, but his shadow disappeared from this condo along with the old wallpaper we replaced in the first months. We repainted everything. The walls were now a warm peach, the furniture bright. The sofa where Malik used to sprawl and watch TV while Zuri cooked, we gave it away. The table where he slammed his hand down whenever she didn't obey, we threw that out too. "I don't want a single trace of him left in this home," I said. "Thank you, Mom," Zuri whispered. "I feel like I can breathe for the first time." We even did a small ritual, a cleansing ritual on Dr. Chen's advice. We lit white eucalyptus incense candles, threw the windows wide open, and Zuri read aloud, "This home is mine. No one has the right to make me afraid here anymore. I am safe. I am free. I deserve to be loved." When she said the last word, she burst into tears, but they were tears of liberation. I sold my business in Chicago, the logistics company I had given 30 years to, from a small office with 3 employees to a company with 200 employees and millions of dollars in revenue each year. My deputy director, Marcus, a man I had trained since he was an intern, took over. "Are you sure, Yvonne?" Marcus asked on the phone. "This is your legacy." "My legacy isn't the company, Marcus," I replied, looking out the window where Zuri was watering the plants. "My legacy is the people I saved, not the things I built." I received a large sum, enough to live comfortably without worry. And with that money, I did something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. I established a small fund, the Zuri Fund, for women escaping domestic abuse. The fund provides free legal support, psychological therapy, job training. The first 3 months of rent. Zuri naming the fund after herself made me object. "Mom, don't name it after me. People will ask." "Good," I said. "Let them ask. Let them know you survived. And if some woman is lying in a hospital bed, terrified and alone like you once were, and she hears this name, she'll know there is hope." Zuri cried and hugged me tightly. In the first month, the fund helped 3 women. By the 6th month, we had helped 23 women and 14 children. I bought myself a small studio in the building next door, a 1-bedroom apartment with a balcony overlooking the park. Close enough to be there for Zuri when she needed me, but far enough for her to have space to build a new life. We became a family, a strange family, broken but real, bound not by blood but by scars. And in that brokenness, we found a kind of love I never knew existed, Love that wasn't blind, wasn't clinging, but clean and free. "I'm going for a walk before sunset," I said, standing. "Should I buy the cinnamon waffles you like?" "Yes, thank you, Mom," Zuri smiled. "And buy milk too." I stepped outside. The air was clean and ringing. I walked down the familiar avenue, savoring simple things. The rustle of leaves under my feet, children's laughter from the playground, a peace I hadn't known in years. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined this moment. 6 months ago, I was sitting in the ICU waiting room, wondering if my daughter-in-law would survive and whether I was strong enough to do what needed to be done to my son. Now I knew the answer. I was strong enough, and Zuri was too. My route took me past the car wash on the corner of Martin Luther King Jr. and 14th Street. Normally I didn't notice the bustle there, but today my eyes snagged on a familiar figure. In one bay stood a huge black Jeep covered in soap foam, and moving frantically around it with a rag in hand was a man wearing a soaked gray uniform. He was thin, not a healthy thinness, but a withered one. His shoulders hunched, his back curved like someone carrying a burden for years. His weather-worn face held deep lines, lines of a 35-year-old who looked 45. His hair was long and greasy, tied back. His hands that used to be soft, moisturized weekly at a spa, were now red and rough, calloused, with cracks around the fingertips. He scrubbed the wheel well with a kind of near-desperate frenzy, the movements of someone terrified of being yelled at if he missed a single speck of dirt. It was Malik. My son, the child who once slept in a silk cradle, who grew up with every privilege, who I gave every opportunity, was now washing other people's cars under the Oakland sun. I slowed, but I didn't stop. He sensed my gaze, a kind of sixth sense, the one the hunted develop. He looked up, lifted a hand to shield his face from the glaring sun, and saw me. For a second, time froze. We looked at each other across the strip of Telegraph Avenue separating us, across the abyss of betrayal, across 6 months of absolute silence, across the sentence I had handed down, and he was living. In his eyes, I expected to see anger. I braced for curses, for hatred, but there was none. Only exhaustion. Endless, dull, bottomless exhaustion of a man fighting every day just to have enough money for a meal. The exhaustion of someone who realizes he has lost everything and will never get it back. His hands, once holding champagne flutes, luxury steering wheels, gold credit cards, were now red from cold water and harsh car wash chemicals, with broken, dirty nails. I noticed another small detail. The uniform shirt was too big. He had lost at least 15 kilograms. The sneakers were torn, the soles thin, soaked through with soapy water. A fading bruise on his cheek, maybe from a fight with a coworker or a drunk customer. He stepped half a pace forward, set the rag down, his lips parted, trembling. I knew what he was about to say. I could read it on his mouth. Mom. One word, one plea. But I did not give him the chance to speak it. I didn't turn away. That would be admitting he still had the power to hurt me. I didn't speed up. That would be admitting I was running. I simply let my gaze pass over him the way it would pass over a street lamp, the way it would pass over a random passerby, the way it would pass over a piece of the past that no longer belonged to my present. And I kept walking. My face remained calm. My steps stayed steady. Nothing trembled inside me. No pity, no satisfaction, no regret, only truth. Everyone receives what they deserve. He wanted a beautiful life without working. He wanted to be worshipped while respecting no one. He wanted to take without giving. Now he worked filthy labor just to survive. Now he was looked down on. Now he had to earn every penny. Balance was restored. I walked another block. The Oakland evening sun painted warm gold across the fronts of the buildings. I could feel his eyes still on my back, heavy, desperate. But he didn't chase after me. Clearly life had taught him at least one lesson. Some doors, once closed, will never open again. Or maybe it was simply the car wash manager, a big Mexican man I often saw yelling at employees, watching closely, and ordering him back to work. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out. A notification appeared on the screen. A message from an unknown number. That number definitely wasn't Malik's. I had blocked his long ago, but he could have borrowed someone else's phone. I opened the message. "Mom, I can't take it anymore. I understand everything now. Give me one chance. Even just $10 to buy food, please. I haven't eaten in 2 days. I'm sorry for everything. I know I was wrong. But I'm your son. You can't let me starve." 3 seconds later, the second message. "Mom, did you read my message? I can see you online. Please, just a little. I'll pay you back. I promise." 5 seconds later. "Mom, answer me. Don't do this. I know you saw the message." 10 seconds later. "Fine. Don't help. Are you happy now? I hope Zuri was worth this. I hope you're happy while your son is living like a dog." And the last message. "One day you'll regret it. When you're lying on a hospital bed and no one is beside you, you'll remember me. But by then, it's too late." I read every line. I saw the pattern, from pleading to promising to threatening, exactly like the psychology manipulation book Dr. Chen had lent me. "Abusers never truly change," Dr. Chen had said. "They only change tactics." Malik wasn't apologizing because he regretted it. He was apologizing because he wanted something. He wasn't admitting wrongdoing. He was just playing the pity card. And the final line, the threat, revealed everything. He still believed he had the right to make me feel guilty. He still believed a mother's love was something he could demand like a debt. My finger hovered over the reply button. I could write, "Endure it. God will provide." I could write, "Find a shelter. They give out free food." I could write, "You had chances. You spent them all." But I wrote nothing, because anything I wrote, whether harsh or kind, would be a thread keeping him tied to me, and I wanted freedom. I tapped the settings icon, selected Block this number, then Delete conversation. The screen flashed. "Are you sure you want to delete?" the phone asked. My finger didn't hesitate. Delete. Blank. The final thread connecting me to the past snapped. I put my phone back in my pocket, inhaled the Oakland autumn air that smelled of dry leaves, roasted coffee from the nearby Blue Bottle, and salty sea from San Francisco Bay. And I smiled, a real smile. Not the strained smile of someone trying to convince themselves they did the right thing, but the smile of someone who knows they did the right thing. Up ahead, 3 more blocks away, was Arizmendi Bakery, where they baked the best cinnamon waffles in the city, with melted cinnamon sugar and a fragrance that drifted down the whole street, where Zuri, my true daughter, was waiting, where my family was. Not a family by blood, but a family by choice. I picked up my pace. I had a life to live, and that life no longer had room for ghosts. Someone was waiting for me at home, and this time it was the right person.